Harold Dawson had lived on Maple Ridge Lane for almost 8 years, yet many of his neighbors still knew very little about him. He was the kind of man who nodded politely, waved when spoken to, and never lingered in conversation longer than necessary. He kept his lawn trimmed with military precision, his hedges squared evenly, and his driveway so clean it looked freshly washed every morning. Some people mistook his quiet nature for coldness. Others assumed he simply wanted to be left alone. The truth was simpler than either guess. Harold had already spent enough of his life in noise. At 73 years old, the retired Vietnam veteran valued peace more than most people valued luxury. He liked the sound of birds before sunrise, the smell of fresh coffee in the kitchen, and the familiar rhythm of routine. Every morning at exactly 6:30, he stepped onto his front porch wearing a pressed flannel shirt, weathered jeans, and the same old boots he had owned for years. In his hands, folded carefully and respectfully, was the American flag. Neighbors noticed this ritual long before they ever spoke to him. He would stand straight, shoulders back despite his age, and slowly attach the folded flag to the pole mounted beside the porch railing. Then, with steady hands, he would raise it upward until it caught the early breeze. Once it reached the top, Harold would pause, lift his chin, and salute. Only then would he go back inside. Some residents watched from their windows while pretending not to. Others timed their morning walks just to pass by during the ceremony. Children waiting for the school bus sometimes grew quiet when they saw him standing there. Without saying a word, Harold had become part of the neighborhood's morning rhythm. To many, the flag was just cloth. To Harold, it was memory. Though he rarely spoke about his service, bits of his past had surfaced over the years through chance moments. A scar visible near his wrist, a faded photograph once seen when his garage door was open, a neighbor who had asked casually if he'd served, only to hear Harold answer, "Long time ago," in a tone that closed the subject. Still, respect for him spread naturally. When Mrs. Alvarez's car battery died one winter morning, Harold appeared with jumper cables before she even called roadside assistance. When the Peterson family's teenage son wanted help building discipline before joining the Marines, Harold spent 3 weekends training him at dawn. When storms knocked out power across the street, Harold loaned flashlights, batteries, and a portable generator without hesitation. He never asked for thanks. That made people respect him even more. Unfortunately, not everyone in Maple Ridge admired quiet dignity. Linda Mercer had been president of the Homeowners Association for 3 years, though she insisted everyone call her board chair, claiming it sounded more professional. She lived 2 houses down from Harold in a large beige home decorated seasonally with excessive enthusiasm and absolutely no taste. Her lawn signs changed monthly. Her voice carried across property lines. Her opinions traveled even farther. Linda believed neighborhoods only stayed civilized through strict enforcement. She monitored trash placement, mailbox paint shades, lawn height, wreath size, and parked vehicles with the energy of a detective solving national crimes. Residents learned quickly that a knock on the door from Linda usually meant trouble. A ladder left visible in a side yard could earn a warning. Holiday lights one day past the deadline could earn a fine. A basketball hoop angled wrong might result in a strongly worded letter printed on expensive paper. Most people rolled their eyes privately and complied publicly. It was easier that way. For years, Harold had somehow remained outside her reach. His yard was immaculate, his home was maintained, his property values offended no one. There was no obvious rule she could weaponize against him, and that bothered Linda more than she admitted. Men like Harold, calm and unshaken, made her feel invisible. Then she found her opening. The HOA handbook, revised during Linda's 2nd year, included a clause about decorative displays exceeding approved visual proportions. It was vague, confusing, and likely unenforceable, but Linda loved vague rules. Harold's American flag, larger than the small garden-style banners many neighbors used, suddenly became her newest obsession. For 3 mornings straight, she stood at her front window with a coffee mug and binoculars, measuring by sight alone. On the 4th day, she marched outside carrying a clipboard, tape measure, and the confidence of someone who had never been told no often enough. Across the street, neighbors noticed immediately. Mrs. Alvarez paused while watering flowers. A teenager slowed his skateboard. Curtains shifted in 3 separate homes. Harold had just finished raising the flag when Linda strode onto the sidewalk leading to his porch. "Mr. Dawson," she called sharply. Harold turned, expression neutral. Linda lifted the clipboard like a badge. "We need to discuss that flag." A silence settled over the lane. Harold glanced once at the flag waving above them, then back at Linda. "What about it?" he asked calmly. Linda's lips tightened. She had rehearsed this moment and disliked how little effect her entrance had made. "It violates community display dimensions," she announced. "It is too large, too prominent, and not in harmony with neighborhood standards." Several neighbors openly stared now. Harold looked at her for a long second, then at the clipboard, then at the flag again. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that people had to lean in from their yards to hear it. "That flag flew over places," he said. "You wouldn't last 5 minutes in." Linda blinked, stunned. And for the first time in years, someone in Maple Ridge had not flinched when Karen came calling. Linda Mercer had expected many reactions when she confronted Harold Dawson on his front walk. Apology, perhaps. Compliance would have been ideal. Even anger would have satisfied her, because anger meant she had gotten under someone's skin. What she had not expected was calm dismissal. Harold's words lingered in the air long after he turned away from her. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply stepped past her, opened his front door, and went back inside as though she were no more significant than a passing breeze. The door closed gently. That somehow made it worse. Linda stood frozen on the porch path, clipboard still tucked under one arm, while curtains twitched all around the street. She could feel neighbors watching. Mrs. Alvarez had suddenly become very interested in trimming the same rosebush for 10 straight minutes. The teenager on the skateboard had stopped entirely and was pretending to retie a shoe while grinning. Humiliation burned hotter than the summer sun. Linda straightened her shoulders, scribbled something dramatic on her clipboard, and marched back to her house. By noon, the neighborhood HOA group chat exploded. Linda Mercer, reminder to all residents: no homeowner is exempt from community standards. Selective compliance creates disorder. Linda Mercer, oversized displays and unauthorized structures will be addressed immediately. Linda Mercer, respectful neighborhoods require accountability. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. Replies came slowly. Some residents sent polite thumbs-up emojis, hoping to stay off her radar. Others ignored the messages entirely. A few brave souls asked whether she was referring to Harold's flag and whether federal protections applied. Linda did not answer those questions. Instead, she posted 3 cropped photos of Harold's porch taken from across the street. The angle made the flag appear massive. Linda Mercer, visual proof. That crossed a line for many people. Mrs. Alvarez privately messaged half the street calling Linda ridiculous. Mr. Peterson wrote, then deleted, 3 increasingly blunt responses before deciding silence was safer. Teenagers in the neighborhood began referring to Linda as Commander Clipboard. Meanwhile, Harold said nothing. At 6:30 the next morning, he stepped outside, unfolded the flag, raised it smoothly into the dawn air, saluted, and returned indoors. Linda watched from behind her curtains with clenched teeth. She spent the rest of the day searching HOA bylaws, municipal codes, and internet forums where other overzealous board members traded enforcement tactics like hobbyists discussing tools. She highlighted phrases. She printed pages. She called the HOA attorney's office twice and left messages marked urgent. No one called back. That evening, she typed an official violation letter on heavy paper stock. Notice of noncompliance. Resident Harold Dawson. Issue: oversized exterior display inconsistent with community harmony standards. Required action: remove or replace within 48 hours. Failure to comply may result in fines, hearings, or corrective measures. She signed it with an aggressive flourish. The next morning, she walked it over personally. Harold was kneeling in a flower bed near the porch, pulling weeds one by one. He rose slowly when he saw her approach. "I'm delivering formal notice," Linda announced. She held out the envelope like a judge handing down sentence. Harold wiped dirt from his hands on an old towel, accepted the paper, opened it, and read the first few lines. Then he folded it neatly, looked at Linda, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Well," she demanded. Well, what? Aren't you going to respond? I just did. He turned back to the flower bed. Linda's jaw tightened. If you ignore this, penalties begin immediately. Harold continued working. Then I suppose you should do what you think you need to do. Nothing enraged Linda more than a person she could not rattle. By afternoon, she issued the first fine, $50. By evening, she made it $100. By the next morning, she claimed repeat defiance and raised it to $250. No one had ever seen fines escalate that fast. Neighbors began talking in driveways, on sidewalks, over fences. This is personal now, Mrs. Alvarez said. It was personal from the start, replied Mr. Peterson. Still, no one confronted Linda directly. She controlled approvals, complaints, landscaping vendors, even access to the community clubhouse. People feared becoming her next target. Linda knew that fear well, and she used it. She began parking her SUV across from Harold's home for stretches at a time, pretending to review documents while actually watching his routines. She noted when he left for groceries, when deliveries arrived, when porch lights turned off. She photographed visitors. She timed how long the flag remained raised each day. Once, a neighbor walking his dog asked what she was doing. Enforcement surveillance, Linda replied without irony. The man turned around and walked the other direction. At night, she drafted new complaints. She accused Harold of creating political discomfort. She claimed his morning salute was intimidating performative behavior. She suggested the flagpole hardware might be an unapproved exterior fixture. Each accusation sounded more absurd than the last, but Linda no longer cared about credibility. She wanted submission. What unsettled her most was Harold's total lack of reaction. No angry emails. No appeals. No pleading. No attempts to negotiate. Every dawn the same ritual continued. Folded flag, slow raise, quiet salute. It was as if her authority simply did not exist in his world. By the fourth day of the feud, Linda barely slept. She replayed his calm face in her mind. She imagined neighbors laughing behind curtains. She pictured herself losing control of the board if people sensed weakness. That evening, she sat alone at her kitchen table, staring through the window at the flag moving gently in the distance. Then she whispered words no reasonable person should ever say over a neighborhood dispute. I'll teach him a lesson. Across the street, unseen by Linda, a small black camera beneath Harold's porch eave blinked once in the dark. Night settled over Maple Ridge Lane with the slow stillness only quiet suburbs seemed to know. Porch lights glowed warm against trimmed lawns. Televisions flickered behind drawn curtains. Sprinklers hissed in timed intervals. By 10 o'clock, the street looked peaceful enough to appear untouched by conflict. But inside Linda Mercer's house, peace had already left. She paced her kitchen in slippers and a robe, muttering under her breath while a mug of untouched tea went cold on the counter. The official violation notices had failed. The fines had failed. The public shamming in the HOA chat had failed. Worst of all, Harold Dawson had treated every move she made as if it were beneath notice. She could tolerate many things. Being ignored was not one of them. From the front window, she could see Harold's porch across the street. The flag had been lowered hours earlier, folded and taken inside like always. The empty pole stood beside the railing, silver in the moonlight. To Linda, it no longer looked like a pole. It looked like defiance. At 11:17 p.m., she made a decision that would ruin her life. She went to the garage and grabbed a half-used bottle of lighter fluid left over from a summer barbecue. From a kitchen drawer, she took a long utility lighter. Then she paused, listening. No cars passing. No voices outside. No barking dogs. The neighborhood slept. She slipped out through the side door, pulled her hood low, and crossed her own yard with quick, nervous steps. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. Halfway to the sidewalk, she nearly turned back. Then she remembered Harold's calm expression. The humiliation returned. She kept walking. Across the street, Maple Ridge Lane was lit only by moonlight and the occasional porch bulb. Linda moved through shadows, clutching the bottle beneath her robe. she reached Harold's lawn and froze. The house was dark. No movement inside. No sound except leaves rustling overhead. She hurried to the porch, hands trembling as she reached for the flag storage box mounted beside the door. She had seen Harold place the folded flag there before sunrise on rainy mornings. Tonight, luck or bad judgment was with her. The latch opened. Inside lay the neatly folded flag. For a brief second, even Linda hesitated. The cloth looked cared for, almost ceremonial. She could have closed the box and gone home. She could have stopped while there was still time. Instead, she snatched it out, dropped it onto the front lawn, and doused it with lighter fluid. The chemical smell filled the air. Her fingers shook as she clicked the lighter 3 times before flame appeared. Then she touched it to the corner of the fabric. Fire rushed across the cloth in a sudden hungry wave. Linda gasped and stumbled backward. The blaze reflected in her eyes as orange light danced across the yard. For one horrifying moment, she realized how insane this looked, a grown woman in a bathrobe setting a flag on fire at midnight over HOA bylaws. Then a bedroom light came on somewhere nearby. Panic hit instantly. She turned and ran. She sprinted across the street, nearly losing a slipper in the gutter, slammed through her side gate, and burst into her kitchen breathing hard. She killed every downstairs light and crouched by the window. Outside, neighbors' porch lights flicked on one by one. A door opened 2 houses down. Someone shouted, "Fire!" Another voice yelled, "Call 911." Linda pressed herself below the window line, chest heaving. She expected sirens any second. Instead, after a minute, she heard running footsteps and then the sound of water spraying. She dared to peek. Harold stood in his yard with a garden hose, extinguishing the flames himself. He wore jeans, boots, and a gray t-shirt, as though he had been awake already. That unsettled her. Even more unsettling was his face. No panic. No rage. No confusion. He looked almost prepared. Neighbors gathered at property lines in robes and pajamas while smoke drifted upward. Mrs. Alvarez covered her mouth. Mr. Peterson stared at the blackened remains in disbelief. Harold dropped the hose, bent down, and carefully lifted what was left of the burned fabric with both hands. No one spoke. Then he turned, walked inside, and closed the door. Linda stayed hidden until the street quieted again. By morning, the ashes were gone. But the story was everywhere. Residents talked in driveways before sunrise, text messages flew, security camera owners reviewed footage. The HOA group chat, usually ruled by Linda, filled with outrage. Who would do this? This is disgusting. Against Harold, are you kidding me? Linda considered posting sympathy but feared sounding too eager, so she remained silent and hoped suspicion would drift elsewhere. At 6:30 a.m., curtains opened all along the street. People waited for Harold's ritual. He emerged carrying no flag. Instead, he walked to the empty pole, touched it once, then stood silently for several seconds. Some neighbors lowered their heads. Then Harold went back inside. 10 minutes later, he came out again holding a phone. He dialed one number, spoke briefly, and returned indoors. That was all. No police cars arrived. No local officers canvassed the block. No dramatic confrontation happened. The calm felt wrong. By noon, Linda began convincing herself she was safe. There was no witness. She had worn dark clothes. It was late. Maybe cameras missed the lawn. Maybe no one would ever know. She even smiled when 2 delivery vans passed by without stopping. At 1:08 p.m., the smile vanished. 3 black SUVs turned slowly onto Maple Ridge Lane. They moved with deliberate certainty, one behind the other, and parked directly in front of Harold Dawson's house. Men and women stepped out wearing windbreakers marked in bold yellow letters. FBI. Curtains flew open across the neighborhood. Doors opened. People spilled outside. Linda dropped the coffee mug in her kitchen sink so hard it cracked. And as agents began walking up Harold's front path, one of them glanced briefly across the street. straight toward her house. Linda Mercer stood frozen behind the slats of her blinds, one hand gripping the curtain so tightly her knuckles turned white. Across the street, the three black SUVs idled quietly while agents moved with calm efficiency around Harold Dawson's front yard. Nothing about them looked rushed. That frightened her more than sirens ever could. If local police had arrived, Linda might have convinced herself this was routine. A few questions, some paperwork, maybe a patrol officer taking notes before moving on to more serious matters. But these people were different. They did not wander aimlessly or chat on the sidewalk. They knew exactly where to stand, where to look, and where to walk. Two agents approached Harold's porch. Another remained near the vehicle, scanning the street with practiced eyes. A fourth spoke briefly into an earpiece while checking a tablet. This was not improvisation. This was purpose. All over Maple Ridge Lane, front doors opened wider. Residents drifted onto porches pretending to collect mail, sweep steps, or check gardens. No one wanted to miss what was happening. Mrs. Alvarez didn't even pretend. She brought a folding chair to the edge of her driveway and sat down openly. Harold opened his front door before anyone knocked. He stepped outside wearing a clean button-down shirt and dark slacks, posture straight as ever. He greeted the lead agent with a handshake that looked less like strangers meeting and more like professionals resuming a conversation. Linda's stomach dropped. They knew each other. The lead agent, a tall woman with silver at her temples, handed Harold a folder. He nodded once and gestured them inside. Two agents entered with her. Others remained outside, speaking quietly and surveying the property. Within minutes, another vehicle arrived, this time a dark sedan carrying two men in suits. The neighborhood murmurs grew louder. What is going on? Did Harold work for them? Who burns a flag and gets the FBI here? Linda backed away from the window, breathing too fast. She forced herself toward the kitchen sink and poured water with shaking hands. Half of it spilled. Think. She needed to think. Nobody had seen her face. It was dark. She wore a hood. She crossed quickly. Even if someone had a camera, maybe the angle was poor, maybe. A knock sounded at her front door. She nearly screamed. Another knock followed, firm but not aggressive. Linda crept to the peephole. Two agents stood on her porch. For one wild second, she considered pretending not to be home, but her SUV sat in the driveway. Her curtains were moving. Her kitchen light was on. She opened the door halfway. Yes. Linda Mercer asked the taller agent. Who's asking? He held up credentials. Federal Bureau of Investigation. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding an incident last night. Linda forced a laugh that sounded brittle even to herself. An incident. The vandalism and arson on Mr. Dawson's property. I don't know anything about that. The second agent, a younger woman holding a tablet, said calmly, May we come in? No. The word came too quickly. Both agents noticed. That's your right, the taller one replied. Then we'll speak here. Neighbors were now visibly watching from every direction. Linda hated that more than anything. I was asleep all night, she said. I only heard shouting after it happened. Did you observe anyone near Mr. Dawson's property in the days leading up to the incident? No. The younger agent glanced at the tablet. Several residents reported seeing you parked across from his home repeatedly this week. Linda's mouth opened, then closed. I was monitoring HOA violations. The taller agent raised an eyebrow, monitoring from a parked vehicle. It's called enforcement. He wrote something down. Sweat formed at the back of her neck. Across the street, Harold emerged from his house with the silver-haired lead agent. They stood near the porch while she reviewed images on a second tablet. Harold's expression never changed. Linda suddenly realized he had not looked toward her house once. Not once. That meant he wasn't worried. The younger agent turned her tablet so Linda could see. A still image filled the screen. A woman in a hood crossing the street at 11:23 p.m. Another image. The same woman standing on Harold's lawn holding a bottle. Another. Flame bursting upward. Another. The woman running back across the street, hood slipping enough to reveal her face. Linda's knees nearly buckled. "That can't be me," she whispered. The taller agent's tone remained neutral. "Mr. Dawson maintains a multi-angle exterior security system with infrared capture, time-stamped, high resolution. I was home. We also have neighborhood camera footage showing your side gate opening at 11:19 p.m. and closing at 11:26. Linda grabbed the door frame. "This is insane, over a flag." The younger agent's voice sharpened slightly for the first time. "Over trespassing, vandalism, arson, harassment, and destruction of protected property belonging to a decorated veteran." Linda stared. "Protected property." The taller agent answered, "You may want to be very careful with what you say next." At that moment, two more vehicles arrived, one carrying local police, another carrying representatives from the HOA management company. Linda's pulse hammered. The HOA manager, a balding man named Carl whom she had bossed around for years, stepped out carrying boxes of files. He avoided her eyes completely. "What is Carl doing here?" Linda demanded. The agent replied, reviewing multiple complaints regarding misuse of HOA authority, selective fines, and retaliatory enforcement. Her mouth went dry. This was no longer about one night. Everything was opening. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez stood and applauded softly. Others joined in before embarrassment stopped them. Linda turned crimson. "You people can't do this to me," she snapped. The taller agent looked genuinely puzzled. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "you did this to yourself." Then he stepped aside as a uniformed officer approached the porch with handcuffs hanging at his belt. The moment Linda Mercer saw the handcuffs, whatever composure she had left shattered completely. "This is outrageous," she shouted, stepping backward into her foyer. "You can't arrest me over a neighborhood disagreement." The uniformed officer remained calm. "Ma'am, no one is being arrested over a disagreement." He took one measured step forward. "You are being detained pending charges related to trespassing, vandalism, reckless use of fire, and destruction of property. Additional charges may follow." Linda's eyes darted wildly from face to face, searching for someone to rescue her. The agent stood expressionless. The HOA manager studied the sidewalk. Neighbors watched in stunned silence. Then Linda did what people like Linda always did when consequences finally arrived. She blamed everyone else. "This is Harold's fault," she screamed, pointing across the street. "He provoked me. He flaunted that flag every day just to antagonize people." Gasps rose from nearby porches. Harold, standing beside the lead FBI agent, simply folded his hands behind his back and said nothing. Linda turned toward the crowd. "And all of you don't act innocent. You complain to me constantly. Trash cans, noise, lawns, dogs. I was the only one keeping this place respectable." That was a mistake. Because once fear broke, resentment rushed in. Mrs. Alvarez stood first. "I complained once," she called out sharply, "about your own son blocking my driveway." A ripple of laughter spread down the street. Mr. Peterson stepped forward next. "You fined me $100 because my flagstone walkway was too patriotic." Another voice from farther down the block shouted, "You charged us for having a blue swing set. You cited my Christmas lights on December 20th. You threatened a lien over garden gnomes. You measured my grass with a ruler." Each accusation hit like thrown stones. Linda spun in circles, face reddening. Lies, all lies. Carl, the HOA manager, finally cleared his throat. "Actually, many of those are documented." Every head turned toward him. Carl adjusted his tie nervously and lifted one of the file boxes from the sedan. "Our company began an internal review after repeated resident complaints. We found irregular fines, selective enforcement, unauthorized fee increases, and disciplinary notices issued without board votes. Linda stared at him as if betrayed by her own reflection. You said everything was fine. Carl swallowed. I said we'd review procedures. You spineless little. Mrs. Mercer, the officer interrupted, turn around please. She refused. Instead, she lunged toward Carl, snatching a folder from the box. Papers scattered into the wind like confetti across the driveway. Neighbors scrambled to catch pages while others simply watched in disbelief. One sheet landed near Mrs. Alvarez's chair. She picked it up, scanned it, and burst out laughing. What is it? Someone asked. She held it high. It's a $200 fine against me for hostile hydrangeas. The street erupted. Even people trying to remain serious couldn't hold it in. Laughter rolled from porch to porch, from driveways to sidewalks. Teenagers doubled over. Mr. Peterson slapped his knee. Someone actually applauded. Linda's face twisted with rage and humiliation. This neighborhood is garbage, she screamed. All of you are garbage. The officer took her wrist firmly. That's enough. She jerked away once. Bad choice. In one smooth motion, he guided her hands behind her back and secured the cuffs. The metallic click echoed down Maple Ridge Lane. For years, Linda had weaponized every sound: door knocks, warning letters, board meetings, clipboard taps on porch railings. Now one sound silenced her completely. She stood rigid, breathing hard, eyes wide with disbelief. The younger FBI agent stepped closer with the tablet still in hand. For the record, she said, we also recovered deleted messages from the HOA group admin account. Linda blinked. What? You removed resident comments critical of you while posting anonymous complaints under alternate accounts. Several neighbors groaned. She was concerned. Citizen 47, one teenager shouted. The crowd laughed again. Linda lowered her head for the first time. As officers escorted her toward the patrol car, she made one final desperate attempt. I'm the board chair, she said weakly. You can't humiliate me like this. Harold finally spoke. His voice carried clearly across the lane. No, Linda, he said, you handled that part yourself. Silence followed. Then even Carl chuckled. Linda was placed in the back seat while reporters from a local station, apparently tipped off by someone in the neighborhood chat, arrived just in time to capture the scene. Cameras rolled as the patrol car door shut. The HOA board members, who had remained hidden until now, suddenly emerged from various homes looking pale and eager to distance themselves. Board member Janet Collins approached Carl first. I'd like to resign immediately, she whispered. So would I, said another. Carl rubbed his temples. We'll schedule an emergency meeting. No need, Mrs. Alvarez called out. Hold it right here. Cheers answered her. Across the street, Harold bent down and picked up one of the scattered papers from the driveway. He read it, shook his head once, and handed it to Mr. Peterson. The citation read, Violation, mailbox paint appears smug. Fine, $75. By the time the patrol car pulled away, Maple Ridge Lane had transformed from a street ruled by fear into something almost festive. And Linda Mercer, who had spent years dragging neighbors to their windows in dread, was finally the one everyone watched leave. The patrol car disappeared around the corner, but no one on Maple Ridge Lane moved for several seconds. It was as if the entire neighborhood needed time to understand what had just happened. For years, people had learned to keep their heads down, answer politely, and avoid becoming Linda Mercer's next project. They had whispered complaints inside their homes, rolled their eyes in private, and paid fines they knew were ridiculous simply because fighting her seemed exhausting. Now the street was quiet in a different way. The fear was gone. Then Mrs. Alvarez stood from her folding chair, dusted herself off, and said the words everyone needed to hear. Well, who wants coffee? Laughter broke the tension instantly. Doors opened wider, neighbors crossed lawns instead of staying on them. People who had lived beside one another for years introduced themselves properly for the first time. Teenagers replayed the arrest scene in dramatic detail. Someone brought out donuts, someone else unfolded lawn chairs. Maple Ridge Lane looked less like a subdivision and more like a block party built from collective relief. At the center of it all stood Harold Dawson, calm as ever. He had moved back to his porch and was quietly sweeping away the last traces of ash from the burned flag. No theatrics, no victory speech, no bitterness. Just clean up. Mr. Peterson approached first, holding a small cardboard box. Figured you might need this, he said. Harold opened it. Inside was a brand new American flag, folded with care. Harold's eyes softened. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, Mr. Peterson replied, we did. Others stepped forward carrying more items than Harold could have expected. A polished brass flagpole bracket from the retired mechanic down the lane. Fresh mounting screws from a contractor neighbor. A small bouquet from Mrs. Alvarez. Even the teenagers contributed by offering to clean the yard and replant the scorched patch of grass. Harold looked around at the crowd gathering near his porch and seemed briefly unsure what to do with so much attention. Then he nodded once. Let's raise it. Word spread faster than anyone intended. By sunset, veterans from nearby streets had arrived after hearing what happened through texts, calls, and social media. Some wore caps stitched with unit names, others walked with canes or careful steps. One older man saluted Harold before saying a word. Children lined the sidewalk holding little paper flags someone had handed out. Parents stood behind them. Even Carl from the HOA management company returned, carrying a printed notice. At exactly 6:30 p.m., the same time Harold normally began his morning ritual, the neighborhood fell silent. Harold unfolded the new flag slowly. The fabric caught the evening light. He clipped it to the line, steadied himself, and began raising it upward. This time he did not stand alone. Mr. Peterson helped guide the rope. Mrs. Alvarez held the base steady. A little boy from 2 houses down stood ramrod straight, copying Harold's posture with intense seriousness. When the flag reached the top, wind caught it immediately. It snapped proudly above Maple Ridge Lane. Harold saluted. So did every veteran present. Many civilians did too. A few neighbors wiped away tears and pretended not to. Then applause erupted from every direction. Long, loud, joyful applause that echoed off garages, rooftops, and years of pent-up frustration. When it settled, Carl stepped forward with the printed notice. I'd like to make this official, he said awkwardly. Effective immediately, Linda Mercer has been removed from all HOA authority pending legal proceedings. Several enforcement policies enacted under her term are suspended. An emergency election for a new board will be scheduled. No one booed. They were too busy cheering. Mrs. Alvarez raised a hand. Can we also ban clipboards? The crowd laughed again. Suggestions began flying instantly. No more surprise fines. Transparent meetings. Resident votes for major changes. Community events instead of complaint campaigns. A garden contest. Movie nights. Pet parade. Teenagers requested a basketball hoop that wouldn't trigger citations. For the first time, the HOA sounded less like an acronym and more like neighbors. As dusk deepened, people lingered in clusters across lawns and driveways. Stories surfaced one by one, letters Linda had sent, threats she'd made, absurd rules she'd invented, small humiliations people had carried quietly for years. Speaking them aloud made them smaller. Harold listened more than he talked. When someone asked whether he had really known the FBI agents, he gave the faintest smile. I knew enough people to make one phone call. That answer only fueled more curiosity, but no one pressed him. Everyone sensed there were chapters of Harold's life he preferred to keep folded away, much like the flags he handled with such care. Later, as darkness settled and neighbors began heading home, Mrs. Alvarez touched Harold's arm. You could have gone after her years ago if you wanted. Harold looked up at the flag moving softly overhead. Maybe, he said. Why now? He considered the question. Because some people think kindness means weakness, he replied. Sometimes they need to learn the difference. By 9 o'clock, Maple Ridge Lane was quiet again. Porch lights glowed, crickets chirped, sprinklers clicked on. But the neighborhood was not the same place it had been that morning. Above Harold's house, the new flag waved steadily in the night breeze. And somewhere in a holding cell, Linda Mercer was learning what everyone else on the street finally knew. Power borrowed through bullying disappears the moment people stop being afraid.